Let's talk about some defenses to stream in Week 17. Believe it or not, but the Raiders have actually had the most fantasy points amongst all defenses since Week 5, and they've quietly had the fourth most on the year. And I think they've been a different team since Antonio Pierce has taken over. Before he came in, they were a -8 in terms of turnover differential. Since he's been the coach, they've been a +5 and have allowed 8 fewer points per game. Now, granted, they have scored 2 touchdowns on defense in each of their last 2 games, which has undoubtedly boosted their rankings in terms of fantasy scoring, but they're still a really good defense, and they have a good matchup against the Colts this week. The Colts may or may not be without Michael Pittman and or Zach Moss, and if that's the case, I think Gardner Minshew may struggle. Last week, without both of them, he barely threw for over 200 yards, didn't have a touchdown, and threw 1 interception. The Colts have all the motivation to win this game, but surprisingly, the Raiders actually have a little bit more than a 10% chance to make the playoffs. And they even have like a 2% chance to win the division, so I'm sure they're going to want to finish the season strong. I know Antonio Pierce wants to make a good impression on Mark Davis and hopefully secure a full-time job, so they're going to do everything they can to win this game. Next on my list are the Jaguars. The Jaguars started off the season hot, going 8-3 over their first 11 games. But since then, they have been on a cold streak to say the least. They've dropped 4 straight and have looked like a shell of themselves, getting outscored 118-77 over this past month. If there was ever a time for them to get it together, it would be now. Nobody seems to want to win the AFC South, and they can do it this week if they win and both the Colts and Texans lose. They're rostered in about 53% of leagues, and this week they get the Panthers, who are coming off of a pretty impressive game. It was easily Bryce Young's best game, throwing for over 300 yards for the first time, but I think that may have been an outlier. The Panthers are still very much raw, and I think Chris Tabor is definitely going to try to keep the head coaching job, so he's going to do everything he can to try to win this game, but they just are still a few years away from being competitive. And I have to mention that the recent struggles for the Jaguars is not only attributed to the defense. If anything, it's been the offense. They have the 3rd most giveaways with 28. And on defense, they're actually tied for the 2nd most takeaways with 25. I do expect the Jaguars to give Bryce Young trouble, and it wouldn't shock me at all to see them add a turnover or 2 to their takeaway total. Last on my list are the Chicago Bears. The Bears have been a different team since acquiring Montez Sweat. Since week 12, they've actually had the 4th most fantasy points amongst all defenses. And on the year, they're tied for the 4th most takeaways with 23, with the majority of them coming since week 11. And this week, they get a very hot and cold Atlanta team. Granted, they haven't gotten much out of the quarterback position, but Coach Arthur Smith hasn't helped anything. They haven't properly utilized Drake London, Kyle Pitts, or Bijan Robinson. I don't see that changing this week. They're rostered in about 31% of leagues, and I think the Bears actually do have a lot to play for. Most of the roster is auditioning for a permanent spot or a new home, so I expect them to come out with some good motivation. Those are 3 defenses to consider streaming. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and let me know your thoughts heading into Week 17 in the comments below.